Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn coming to you live from the camera store, and tonight I am pleased to bring you Storytelling for Change, Photographers Without Borders, and soon I'll be joined by our special guest, Danielle Khan Da Silva. As always, we'll be following community guidelines when it comes to moderating our chat. The intentions of tonight's discussion is to educate and inform, and our team will remove any comments that violate community standards. That being said, the best part of going live is getting to interact with all of you. And so I encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout the entire presentation. And you can do that in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. You also have the option, if you prefer to do it anonymously, or if you're not logged into YouTube, you can email me, which is evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I'll be happy to check out those comments and questions as well. And we have our TCSTV live dream team working behind the scenes. And tonight we have Drew and Chris. And so we thank them very much for working hard to make all of this happen. And hopefully everything goes off without a hitch. But of course we are live, so anything can happen. And if it does, we'll be sure to update you in the chat. So stay tuned for that. Now, if you don't know already, tonight our guest is Danielle Khan Da Silva, who's an award-winning documentary photographer, a director, a leader, and a speaker who has done 2 TEDx Talks, and has worked with hundreds of NGOs and communities in over 50 countries, and has helped protect over 100 hectares of land in the world. She is notably the founder and executive director of Photographers Without Borders, which is a nonprofit organization registered in the US and Canada that supports grassroots initiatives for protecting the planet and visual campaigns. Now, before I bring on our guests, I also just wanted to give a shout out to Barry Crean, who's in the audience tonight. He helped connect us because he's also a member of Photographers Without Borders. And so thank you so much for making this suggestion and connecting us to Dan. We're very excited about this. And before I bring her on, I want to give you an introduction to what Photographers Without Borders is all about. And so the TCSTV Live Dream Team is going to put on this quick, brief intro video so you can find out all about it.
The need to see beyond
is what drives me.
Curiosity pushes me forward.
I want to understand.
To feel.
To learn.
And unlearn.
A single frame
can change the minds
of millions.
We can see what it looks like to resist,
reclaim,
and reimagine.
To be behind the lens
is a privilege
that comes with great
responsibility.
I'm
more than a photographer. I'm a photographer without borders.
Wow, I was just telling the guys that this trailer just gives me chills, showing what Photographers Without Borders is all about. And so I want to bring on Danny. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing what Photographers Without Borders is all about.
You're awesome. It was so much fun hanging out with you in Sumatra, and I can't wait to talk about that later. And yeah, just thank you, Evelyn, and everyone on your team for having me here.
Absolutely. Now, as the founder and executive director of Photographers Without Borders, why was it important for you to create this organization and a movement for change in storytelling? What is your mission?
So, first of all, I think it all starts with the stories that we hear. And for me, growing up as an Indian woman who's mixed heritage in Canada, it was a really interesting, space to grow up in. And so you hear all kinds of stories about who you are, and not having the knowledge from firsthand around my cultural stories and backgrounds, and my parents wanting to really assimilate into the culture. I grew up hearing things that weren't necessarily aligned with, the myriad of stories that existed, about my people, about our cultures. And so for me, it was really about changing narratives And so also I started off in the conservation and international development realms, and really wanting to, work with the United Nations and work with multilateral institutions to enact change in some way. And it was just for me, once I became part of that environment, it just became clear that, I kind of started asking myself, where are the local community members? Where are the Indigenous people? Where are the people at the front lines, in these conversations? And so I started to look in those spaces, in the grassroots, and started to, travel to India, which was really important for me and in my journey, to get to understand my roots, my people, our traditions, our cultures, our languages. There's so many languages in India. And, on my Portuguese side, learning the Portuguese language and the culture, and traveling there too. And just seeing like that there's so many stories, so many more than I had been, exposed to. And so it really started from there, but then it became, really important to also then, see, okay, well, there's these grassroots communities all over the world that are addressing all of these problems that we see in the world, or that we, describe in certain ways. And, they're not being heard, they're not being funded, they're not resourced properly. And so, Photographers Without Borders at its core is really about serving those communities that don't have access to storytelling media to tell their story. And that makes sense today, right? Like, we live in a world where obviously stories are really powerful ways of helping get receive funding, helping organizations and initiatives be seen. And so, but 13 years ago, pre-social media, that wasn't the case. And so that was kind of where the idea started. And now we've kind of really blossomed into an organization that also really wants to see capacity built, at the storyteller level as well. And we want to see a world where, storytellers from their communities are telling their own stories. And so now we've really branched out into educational programs and scholarships and things like that. And I'm just noticing it's got really dark. So is it okay if I just go and turn a light on?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we had someone say it's gotten dark. Well, that's fantastic. And of course, tonight we're going to be talking a lot about ethical literacy and storytelling. Oh, that's much better. So I wanted to ask you, Danny, what does it mean to you to document behind an ethically informed lens? And why is it important for photographers to ensure that their stories are being brought to light and represented in a truthful and honest way?
Ooh, yeah, I mean, that's such a big question, right? Because then we have to start thinking of, well, how have stories not been shared in truthful or honest ways? Or how have things been done in an unethical way? Or like where, it's about really becoming mindful, for me. It's a practice of mindfulness, of accountability, of building integrity, and then, changing your behaviors and your processes so that you can stand in integrity, throughout the process. And so there's different things that, I think anyone telling any stories really should think about before, during, after, and ongoing. So there's a lot of stuff I could break down in all of those sections, but I'll just share like what I think are the biggest pieces from each of those, parts of the journey. So like, I think there's a lot of work that should go into a story or a project before, at least for me in my practice. And when we're talking about ethics, thinking about our intentions, like what is our why for doing this story or this project? What is my positionality, or, positionality, for those of you who aren't aware of this term, it's just like that intersection of all of the lenses that we each hold, right? And each of us has such a unique lens, and we bring that with us into every situation. So even before the start of a project, it's important to think, okay, am I the right person to tell this story? How connected am I to this? Like, what is my relationship to the people, or, what's happening in this project? And do I have consent? And like when we talk about consent, there's always so many questions about this. And I think one of the best guides that I've seen is the free and prior informed consent model, which is to say, like, the consent is free, as in there's no coercion. It's done prior to you traveling to a place or being in a space, or like you've done some work in order to obtain this consent in an advanced manner. And then it's informed. So that means there's complete transparency in terms of how those images are going to be used and how the photographer might benefit, right? And oftentimes what you see is, people will pull out release forms and, get them signed and not really discuss. A lot of release forms don't discuss like how those are going to be used later. It's just kind of like a general release and it signs away like your image and your likeness. And that is the way it has been done, right? And then photographers can go on to make like millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even just a little bit, but still something off of that likeness. So all of these things are really important that folks actually have a real understanding of, even if you don't know what really will become of it, at least you can share that in a transparent way, knowing that consent also can change before, during, or after the process, ongoing. And then during an assignment, and again, like I said, there's so many more things I think to think about before starting, but that would be where I would start. During the process, I think it's really important to ask a lot of questions, make sure that you're taking a lot of notes, making sure that you're really engaged with like what's happening, and creating real relationships where there's then accountability later, right? Like where you have a connection of some kind as you're going through the process. And, I think other pieces that go into that are like thinking about the language that we're using even, right? A lot of the times with cameras, there's this weaponizing terminology, largely because this industry kind of like came about when, there were a lot of wars to photograph, and that those were kind of the images that really shocked the nations and also acted as propaganda to help people enlist or support these efforts. And so a lot of the photographers were war photographers. So, this language of, shooting, taking photographs, capturing, even like the flash functions having that master and slave function, like these terminologies that we use became very weaponized. And that can be, for some people that seems innocuous, but it can also have knock-on effects. And so thinking about how we're speaking about the language, and especially depending on who we're working with. For example, if you're working with populations that may have experienced trauma, like you want to be careful around the language that you're using in general.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
then
especially where you are, if there's a language barrier, it sometimes is a tough thing for us to rethink some of the language that we've heard, especially if this was the way that we learned photography, or this was the way we learned whatever it is. And I know even in our conversation, I had used a term and you're like, oh, actually, can I share this information with you? And it really makes you think about some of these things. I mean, I think one of the key ones that I've heard years ago was, if you take a photo from someone rather than, someone giving you that photo or giving you that consent. And although sometimes it might seem trivial because it's just words, it's technical jargon in some cases, I think you have a really good point here. And actually, I'm going to share your article in the comments here that goes through some suggestions and different terms that you can use that might even impact the way that you think about your photography.
Absolutely. I really believe that language is power and it's vibration. And, when we start to be more mindful of our language, we're also becoming more mindful of other things, right? And that's kind of like the power of ethical literacy in this realm, or, decolonizing. And I use the word decolonizing because it's so important for us. We carry this value in our work at Photographers Without Borders, because so many of the community partners we work with have been impacted tremendously by colonialism all over the world, right? A lot of these problems that we think of in terms like poverty, or, where certain communities need education, we have to ask ourselves, okay, and especially as storytellers, why is that the case? What has happened historically to lead us to this place? And if that's not part of the storytelling, I think that we need to kind of examine that. But then, we become more mindful, and the way that, communities have been colonized has been reenacted with how we have told stories about those communities. And so it's important for us to decolonize because we have been taking for so long. We have been exploiting, extracting, occupying even in some cases, with our work, and not necessarily intentionally or with any malice, but it's just the part of the conditioning that comes with being colonized.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the benefits, some of the unseen benefits of being ethically informed. What are some things that can happen when you're being mindful about this?
I love that. That's such a great question. I think a lot of photographers don't think about this, but being ethically informed makes you a lot more hireable, because A, you're less of a liability, and two, you're gonna just come to a set with a lot more value. And so that, like, whether it's an assignment or a set or whatnot, it does add value in of itself to any project that you're on, because you become a resource. A lot of the times, these conversations are happening in many pockets, and a lot of the times, people are looking for people who have that ontology or that understanding. Again, to make you less of a liability. It also attracts partners that are aligned to your values, which I think is really important. Something I've noticed from my personal work is that the more I delve into this work, into this practice, and make mistakes and try to learn from them, is that I'm also attracting project partners, funders, that are more aligned with the values that we share. Because how can you find that alignment if you're not clear on where you stand in your work? So.
Absolutely. And I just want to say we're going to get to some of your incredible photographs shortly. But before we do that, I wanted to hear a little bit from you on constructing impactful stories. How do you make change with telling these stories? Again, truthfully, honestly. And what are some of the ways that you've witnessed some positive impacts in doing this?
Another amazing question, Evelyn. So for me, in our we have a storytelling course called Art of Storytelling, and we kind of share this formula with everyone, and so I'll share it with all of you today as well. And that is, number one, it's really important to think about, when it comes to impact, what is your definition of the desired impact or outcome that you're looking for? If this project succeeded in terms of what impact I want to have, what would be that tangible, measurable, specific, realistic, tangible impact? And I think it's really important to be specific about your goals and to really think about, again, those intentions related to your goals. So that's one. And then understanding your audience. So once you understand your goals, then you decide, who's the best person or best people or best audience to serve this impact, right? Like, who do I need to reach in order to, who does this story need to reach in order for me to reach this impact goal? And then the last thing is like having that clear call to action where you're making a very clear ask and creating stories really in the process that bring you closer or bring your audience closer to that action point, if that makes sense. And so that would be like the formula I would share in terms of thinking about impact. But I think for me, like, the most positive impact that I've had as a storyteller and that I've experienced, like you said earlier, like, I've helped protect alongside many Indigenous people over 100 hectares of land. But what's more powerful, I think, is the healing that comes for everyone involved when a project is done from an ethical standpoint and with all of these considerations. There's so much healing that can happen. And that, to me, is everything. Especially because I do work with Indigenous communities predominantly. Like, that is incredibly important for me, that's an outcome.
Excellent. Well, let's look at some of your work and talk about some of these examples of ways that these photographs were documented. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. And this, to me, is such a powerful photograph to start with. So can you tell us a little bit about this project and who this person is?
Yeah, so this is one of the grandmothers from Sambali Trust. It's an organization that I've worked with for many years, located in Rajasthan in India. and she's a widow. And in Jodhpur, in the community that I work with, it's a very conservative community. There is a lot of patriarchy, a lot of division between Muslims and Hindus, and low caste individuals, or people known as Dalits or untouchables. Um, and this organization is supporting women like her in learning skills like sewing, and just bringing them together too to form their own co-ops so that they can support one another, because in these societies widows are often considered similar as untouchables. And so for me, like, this project also, when I think about the story of Jodhpur and the story of India, I can't think of it without thinking about, what the British have done to India, to create these divisions. Because prior to them arriving, the Muslims and Hindus got along much better than they did after the British left. So there's a lot of impact there, and I feel like all the stories that you see here from India are going to reflect that, and are part of that journey and that storytelling. So yeah, she's one of the widows, and this is an image from Pushkar, which is it's a very holy town. It's also where they have something called the Pushkar Camel Fair, and that's actually been like an animal trade fair that they've had for many, many, many years. And it's this particular part of the project is not about Sambali Trust. It's actually about referencing a long-term project I'm working on around animals and our relationship to them. So it involves like zoos and situations like this, animal encounters and things like that. So it's a long-term project I'm working on. This is Bambayar, one of my favorite little girls ever. She is a Mongolian nomad in Mongolia. I was lucky enough to teach a workshop here for Photographers Without Borders a few years ago, and we worked with this organization called Gur to Gur. It's run by a Mongolian woman and her partner, and they work with the nomads to help basically sustain their way of life, with so many pressures, creeping in from the expanding city centers. And Mongolia is known for its mining. I believe copper mining is their biggest income source. And so those entities, those extractive, what I call colonial entities, are creeping in and taking up space in the regions that they call home. And so to me, she represents this link between the past and the present and the future. And this image to me just says it all. And she's just so powerful. Like, this was all her idea. She wanted to make this happen. She was having so much fun with this scarf, and it was one of the best trips I've ever had. So we lived with her family out in the plains of Mongolia for several days on our journey.
Yeah, I love this one. I mean, she does look so powerful. And I was going to ask you how you were able to work with her family, to be able to create this photograph.
Yeah, so the beauty also of working with community-based organizations and local organizations is just the relationships that you're able to cultivate. There's that relationship that you build, like I said, when you put the work in beforehand. It makes it easier when you get there. There's already like trust. Everyone knows what your intentions are. So there's already a safe space to create beautiful magic like this. There's no question about what our intentions are, things like that. So again, it kind of speaks to that process and how that process can lead to, I think the one benefit I left out, mistake, was that you get more powerful images too as a result.
Because you get their input.
Yeah, you get more knowledge, you figure more things out. You get to have that honest representation that you were talking about before. This is part of my tiger project in India. So a lot of people love tigers like me. I was born in the year of the tiger, so I don't know, I've just got this affinity towards them. But again, I would be remiss to want to do a project on tigers without thinking about their relationship to the indigenous peoples that have lived with them for so long and have called the tiger their grandfather. So many people don't know this, but in India, where I photographed this, many of the reserves where you can still see tigers, there have been reports saying, tiger populations are doing well, they're healthy, this and that. What people don't know is that their reserves are so small that they almost resemble cages, like very large open air cages, and that the indigenous people that lived in these parks have all been displaced. Not every single park has resulted in displacement, but many of them have. And the people that are displaced are often lured into, little settlements where they're given like a toilet, a very basic latrine and, a gas stove and things that are incompatible with their way of life. And then they have to, ask for passes, for example, to go visit their spiritual sites or sacred sites in the parks. So whenever I'm doing stories about like conservation or tigers or animals or anything like that, I'm always trying to connect it back to the people, because they're the people who have protected this planet, for thousands of years, and who have the ways and the knowledge. And I think it's really important that we learn more about what that knowledge can do to serve us and to serve the land that we still have. And this is a young woman who, her name is Estrella, which means star in Portuguese. And this is in Mozambique, where I've been working on a project with an organization called Love the Oceans. If we have time later, you'll see potentially some footage. And so she's one of the young people in this community that was affected by this huge hurricane that came and destroyed many of the resorts, the foreigner-owned resorts that pretty much everyone in the community was employed by. So what happened is this hurricane came through, destroyed these resorts. The expats who ran the resort left and didn't do anything for the people that worked for them. So they were all kind of just left in a vacuum of, okay, what do we do now? And so they've been working with Love the Oceans to help build, with the permission of the elders and the support of the whole community, to build their own ecotourism destination. And so the first step of that is creating a marine protected area. And so they have scientists and biologists that are supporting the research side of things. And they're also doing work to build capacity for the local population to lead all of the ecotourism activities. So it's like a multi-year process that they're engaging in to make this a real reality. But I guess what this image means to me is, that representation of the future that we're all looking towards. And that the community is looking towards with this capacity building. So they're doing things like teaching them how to swim and how to dive and how to do the research as well alongside them, so that they can all flourish together. Another picture from the Pushkar Camel Fair in India. I'm always just curious about, the relationship between people and their animals, and just in general, non-human beings. And yeah, this was just such a beautiful moment. And I feel like this moment can speak for itself in a way. And same with this. The man in the background in the orange is what's known as a sadhu, or somebody who's kind of shed their earthly possessions, donned orange robes, and kind of live off of alms, like what people will give them. And again, I just love the framing, the way that he's looking at me, but then my focus is on the horse. I like creating visual interest with my images as much as possible. And so this was,
I love the way he's framed by the horse, and you have a little bit of that negative space around him. Actually, a question just about your image selection and your editing a project. Do you struggle with the idea of sometimes telling the truth in the story and wanting to share everything that you captured, but then also narrowing it down to the focus of the story and the intention that you had behind it?
Yeah, like sometimes it can be really difficult to narrow down. I do feel, however, that there's a certain magic to the process where, especially when you're doing something with a lot of intention, you kind of already know when you're done. Like you're like, you know where all the magic images are and you can't wait to get to them. And then there's always the now, okay, how do I fill in the rest of the story? How do I, answer some of the other questions that the audience might have? And did I get like enough variety? That's what I'm also concerned about. There's another image from Mozambique, and this is a tree that's laying on its side, and people come to this tree and they cut it bit by bit for firewood because it's really good firewood. And so it's like the community tree that everyone is using for this purpose. And this girl was on the tree, and she'd been following me around all day and wanting to have her picture taken. And so she was like really happy that I made this picture of her, and she was just really having fun and enjoying herself that day. But to me, again, this tells the story of what Love the Oceans is doing, because they're making it possible for women like her, young women like her, to see a future ahead. And I think that's powerful. This is another photograph of a tiger. This is probably my most sold image, most requested image thus far. And I remember I had just gotten named a Sony Alpha female, and they'd just given me all this new gear, and I was excited to try it out, and this was the trip I was trying it out on, and I was so impressed with this autofocus technology that got through all the foliage. So yeah, that's my Sony A9 right there doing its magic. Yeah, it's a beautiful Royal Bengal tiger in Ranthambore National Park.
Fantastic.
This is a young man from another village that we stayed in with on that journey through Mongolia. And I just thought he was so badass. Like, he was getting up in the morning to chop wood in the rain and like do all kinds of other chores and activities that I was just so impressed. And so all of us were always trying to help, and definitely not doing as good a job as he was. And he kind of just looked at us with amusement, the same amusement you can see right now. It was kind of like, what? Why are you like so terrible at these easy tasks?
These jobs I do every day.
Yeah. And this is his brother riding a bike. They were really fun to hang with. Love photography. We all love photography.
Wow. This is pretty amazing.
This is a young girl who was standing outside of, I can't remember the name now, but it was one of the temples that we visited in Mongolia. And they are not of the tribe that does the falconing. That many people, associate Mongolia with, but they're dressed as them, and they're holding this this bird and asking for money so that people can pose with it outside and pose with them. But to me, like this is not intended to be a judgmental photograph. It's simply to like demonstrate, that this is life. That this is her joy, and it's also got this like very, a lot of difficult ties into it, right? Like where, to me, again, this is a byproduct of colonial thinking and conditioning, where like to feel like you've gone to Mongolia, they're suiting the tourists' wants and needs. So instead of having to go all the way to the communities that actually do this and, forming those relationships, you can have this like quickie of an experience here and pretend that you actually did it. And So that's interesting how a lot of people and indigenous people too feel like they have to perform their culture in order to satisfy like the touristic appetite. So that to me was the interest for this photograph, or the reason behind why I photographed this. But I think, there's also the other side of it where it's like this is also, how people are making money in these communities. And there's also the animal treatment, question to be asked. But, for me, it's like I'm really trying to do things without casting judgments on people anymore. I did a lot of that in my youth, and I think now I'm stepping back and really trying to take it all in and really appreciate like the stories from every angle. Another young one from Mozambique. I called her my photography assistant because she just really wanted to hold the flash and learn new things. And that light has gone off again. Hold on. It's on a motion sensor. Oops. So this is us actually playing with a Profoto flash that I was lent by Profoto. Thank you, Profoto. I love you guys.
Everyone keeps just sending you gear, Danny.
I just like to try new things, they let me, so that's cool. I appreciate it. And so this was us playing around with the flash and making something that I feel is really beautiful. She loved it too.
It is, it's stunning. And I love her, is it a sibling on her back?
Not even a sibling. This was actually the son of Estrella.
Okay.
I believe. Yeah, and like the kids are just helping each other out. Families help each other out in Mozambique. Another horse, a beautiful horse made with my Sony Alpha. Just the milky colors, but it's also from the Pushkar fair. Same story. Just love the light and the play between light and dark here, and the man in the background that you hardly notice until you keep looking at the photograph.
Mm-hmm.
Taking care of his horses diligently. So this is Rupa. She's a acid attack survivor. I was working with an organization called the Shiro Cafe. So so in India and other places in the world, there's these phenomenon of acid attacks, caused obviously by patriarchy and just a lot of other elements that exist in the culture, and also again as a result of colonialism, like the way that men have been conditioned to treat women. A lot of people associate India with goddess worship and goddess culture, and the reverence towards women and the mother and the holy mother and the cows and things like that, and that's really like been erased or attempted to be erased, and really denigrated the status of women in India. And so we're left with situations like this. In this case, it was a jealous mother-in-law who encouraged her son to throw acid on her face for whatever reason, right? This is unjustifiable violence. But this cafe has started employing only acid attack survivors, because what happens is like after something like this, it's really difficult, A, to get medical care, B, become an outcast in society frequently, and C, it's really hard to find another husband. And a lot of women, especially from more conservative communities, if you're unmarriageable, then you're worthless in those contexts. And so these places employ acid attack survivors and give them an opportunity to make money so that they can have a place to live and have a sense of safety and rebuild their lives together and find community as well. So super powerful project. If you're ever in India, there's several locations, and I highly recommend, if you want to donate to something, this is a great project. Yeah. This is one of the boys and the women from in Rajasthan, where I'm working with Sambali Trust. So again, these are are women from a rural desert community called Citrava. And right now they're at a meeting to discuss their co-op's finances and who gets to have the pot of money this month. So what they do is they put money together every month, and then they decide who it will go to in the group of women to support any project that they're working on, whether it's a small business, maybe she needs to buy a goat or a cow or a new sewing machine or new fabric, or someone's husband just beat them and she needs, like, I don't know, some support for her child, or something has gone awry in the marriage and someone needs support. So that's what this one of the many things that this organization does, and that's what's happening in this photograph. And of course, children are welcome to come to these meetings so that they can't be left at home, obviously, alone. And Somebali always makes sure that the kids are taken care of as well. And this is another photograph from the Pushkar Animal Fair. So a portrait of this gentleman. I would have to check my notes, go back to my notes. This is from several years ago to remember his name and the specific story. But it is another from that series. This is Mira.
I love this.
I adore her. She's like my auntie. She's actually somebody she lives in Citrava, but she was originally living in what's now called Pakistan. So her story is actually directly related to the impacts of colonialism, in the sense that, because of partition, because India got separated into these different fragments, she now has a lot of difficulty seeing her family. So being married into an Indian family, if she wants to go back and forth to Pakistan to see her parents, it's always like a journey. It's always a struggle. And so she's a very enterprising woman. Thanks to Somebali, she's been able to start her own business. She's been able to send her son to Italy to study. So she's always like showing me pictures of her son, and she's like, he's in Italy and I'm so sad, and but yeah, she always makes the best chai, and I always go with her. And
can you talk a little bit about just making this photograph? Like, did you have her come out and you knew the light and obviously the symmetry? There's a lot of amazing things happening in this photo. How did it all come together?
Oh, this is not like at all set up in any way. It was a moment. I always notice when light is happening, or, an energy is happening, or I see like all the elements coming together. She's walking towards the house. I might have said like Mira, like
her expression is very natural, but everything else looks very intentional.
I might have cracked a joke and like she turns around. I can't remember the exact situation, but it was very natural, and it was just me getting the light at the right time. And something I love about my A9 too, and I'm not getting paid by Sony for this, by the way, but I just want to say, like, I love the silent shutter, because it's like nobody knows what's happening.
Yeah, they're gonna be watching. They're gonna want to do something later. We do lots with Sony, but not this.
It's always nice when you have these strong relationships, though, because I can just bring like my camera out and it's not uncomfortable. Like nobody feels like they're just like, oh yeah, it's Auntie Danny again. This is stepping into another world that's very special to me, which is on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, which is one of the largest archipelagos in the world. And this is a palm tree. It looks like it's spinning out of control.
And sorry, I missed what you said. It's one of the largest, which in the world?
Archipelago. I always struggle with that word.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thank you. So it's a palm oil tree spinning out of control, because that's kind of how it feels like when you land in Sumatra. Like all you can see is palm oil trees for days and days and days. And Barry, I know you remember this. And yeah, this just feels representative to me of the problem of, what orangutan conservationists see as a major problem. And which has also become a problem for not just, you know, the orangutans and the elephants, but also the humans, because these trees suck up so many liters and gallons of water per day. So when these plantations end up next to indigenous communities, which is often the case, they're also sucking up so much of the natural water reserves. And then what ends up happening is that they have to then buy water from the government or from the company to supply the community. And so this is making a lot of communities wise to what's going on from a different perspective. And, you know, here are some of the lives that are at stake from this exponential palm oil expansion, by the way, facilitated by countries like Canada, US, England, China. So it isn't all Indonesian companies, a lot of foreign-owned companies. And these are two orangutans, mother and baby, playing on the ground. If you watch any of my second TEDx talk, there's a story about the mother here. Her name is Mina, and that's her baby Mansour. And I've actually followed them for a few years. I haven't seen her in, you know, for at least 4 years, which is making my heart ache. But she's one of the most powerful orangutans. She's got her own story. I don't know if I have time to share it, but essentially she was also an orangutan that was captured and rescued by one of the organizations that I work with, and she was rehabilitated by another person that I work with named Dharma, who's this incredible indigenous eco warrior, and she's been released back into the wild. She's had I believe 3 children. But she's still semi-wild, right? She still seeks out humans for food, like when they're stopping on their picnic breaks in the forest, things like that. And so and she's pretty aggressive. She can be aggressive when asking for food. So those that, you know, are fearful of her have pulled out their machetes and cut her hands and cut her face, and like she's been injured so many times. But this is and she's very protective of her children. So this was a time when I was with Dharma, who she's familiar with. And every time I'm with Dharma, we always have these magical experiences with her. Like she senses his presence, and probably remembers us too, and lets us be with her. You know, whereas when other people come through, you'll see her chasing them and demanding food and, you know, doing other behaviors. But this is one of those moments of joy that I love this image. And this is one of my best friends, Nyla. She's also an indigenous Batak eco warrior in Sumatra. She's one of the only female conservationists that works in the field in Sumatra. And she grew up in a palm oil plantation. And so she had that experience growing up, you know, seeing the people around her working in the fields and things like that. And it was after she had gotten her master's in English literature that she met my other friend Panut, who had started an orangutan rescue organization. And so she volunteered with them for a while before becoming a paid staff member, and has now actually gone on to start her own organization, which supports Indigenous women and also LGBT community members in Sumatra to safely access the conservation space. So super proud of her. And we're actually working together on a National Geographic project right now. And so I should be seeing her in November, fingers crossed. And I'm she's just such a powerful leader and person with her own really powerful story. And this is baby Mansour. So the orangutan you saw earlier, this was him when I had first met him, the first year that I went to Sumatra. So you saw him like a little bit more grown up in the last image.
So cute.
And this is at a church in Lake Toba. Lake Toba is kind of where the origin stories or some of the early stories from the Batak community come from. and kind of similar to places like Canada, so-called Canada, they also had missionaries come and try to re-educate the people. And, the Batak people have really powerful songs and stories. They even have wedding songs for the orangutans when it's mating season. So what these stories and songs demonstrate is the strong connection, that the indigenous people have and had with everything around them. They called the tiger their grandfather as well. And, this is just kind of an image of one of the churches in the region. A lot of the local people have, shed their indigenous heritage for the, predominant religious groups that have colonized Indonesia, and many groups have colonized Indonesia, by the way. But this was just a way of me showing that, and showing how they've also kept some of their traditional heritage in the process. And this is another baby orangutan. And I believe it's also Mansour. He's like the cutest thing ever. So he's this is probably the in-between from the first image that we saw and the last one. So this is him just a little bit more grown up. And yeah, just hanging out in the tree, again, demonstrating, just like his mom, how defiant, I guess, and fearless he is, which I think is kind of cool. And this would be the other side of the coin, where at the end of the day, these beings are beings, and a lot of the things we do in the name of entertainment or even conservation, right? Like I think of a lot of zoos and I think of this image, right? And I won't name any in particular right now, but I think some of the ones that we even think of as good zoos or zoos that are doing it right, you a lot of the time will see animals looking like this or displaying signs of stress. And so this was actually made also in Sumatra, at a place where people go, with their families when there's time off, to enjoy the day, get a snack, look at some alligators. And then there's this sad macaque monkey in a cage, kind of just chained up in the corner, and kids can go and feed him all kinds of things, bubble gum and bananas and sometimes just junk and garbage. So this, I don't even think I really have to say anything. I think this image says so much, and for me, it just calls into question, like, what are we really teaching our kids? What are we teaching? Because a lot of the times I also hear it's a great way to educate your kids or connect your kids to nature and things like that. But really, I think contemplating a patch of grass would probably be more in connection with nature than perpetuating that narrative of dominion over nature, right? By having that glass or those bars separating the two. And I don't think we should have the privilege or the luxury really of seeing a lion in downtown Toronto. It doesn't make sense. That's just my feeling. Thank you for listening.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, here I'm going to exit this here. And before we get into a couple of the projects that you directed on the documentary side, I just wanted to open it up and just say that everyone's welcome to ask any questions that you have to Danny. And so we are going to showcase a couple different projects and trailers of the projects that Danny has directed with the team. You have such an incredible team, a lot of awesome creative people. So the first one we are going to start with is going to be Beyond the Gun project. So we'll get the TCSTV Dream Team to cue that up.
The tragedy of poaching has affected us from rhino to lion to elephant. There's a lot of response towards that. There's a lot of anti-poaching, and there's a really militant and strong approach to protecting wildlife on the borders. This little boy came up to me and said, if rhino horn is keratin, which is the same as our nails, then why are we killing them?
People, when they're backed into a corner and they have to do what they need to do to survive and it's quick money, you're going to get criminal activity. You're going to get things like poaching.
I just want more kids to accomplish school and finish school, because most kids don't finish school.
I knew in my heart and my mind that if we don't change and include our local communities, we've lost. To shoot and kill a problem, that's the easy way, but it's not solving anything.
Amazing. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in this project and what inspired you and the team to go behind it?
Yeah, so Damari McBride, who's been a good friend for many years, and he was one of our community members who wanted to take on this assignment. And so the way our assignments work is that we develop relationships, or we have existing relationships with different NGOs around the world, and then we create like an assignment description for it, where people can see, you know, what's available, and then applied to be on those assignments. And so Damari was a great fit for this one. Had really good rapport with the not-for-profit that we were working with. Their name is Nourish. And so, as everyone may or may not know, South Africa has experienced apartheid, which was segregation of Black folks, the native Black folks, and a lot of really violent struggle and difficulty as a result of it, and so are now healing and reconciling after apartheid. And so one of the things as a result of this era is that a lot of communities are still segregated. There's still a lot of lack of equity and access, especially to things like their natural heritage. So a lot of communities of color don't have the funds or the ability or the means to access these game parks that were created during these colonial and apartheid eras, right? That really benefited rich trophy hunters, tourists, the local, colonizers. I don't know what other word to use. And we wanted to work with this organization because of the work that they're doing to uplift the young population and to really give them access to going on things like safaris, to experiencing, you know, animals like snakes and things like that, so that they don't have fears around it, so that they can, you know, again, remember their heritage and, you know, their stories, because they're warriors. You know, they have these like powerful stories that have been forgotten through these times, and they were the stewards of the land. They are the stewards of the land, and so to connect them back to that, to the nature and to themselves in the process, and so we wanted to support their work. Obviously, they're doing a great job of doing this work. They take young kids on field trips. They educate them in schools. They have their own program where they support grandmothers and youth. And I think that connection between elders and youth is so important, and to bring them all into the conversation of conservation instead of excluding them, as I think we often do. Yeah, and so this project also ties into obviously anti-poaching as well, which has largely been an anti-Black, especially in South Africa, endeavor, right? Where the saying is, you know, kill a poacher, save a rhino, or save a rhino, kill a poacher, which is code for, you know, Black folks in South Africa. And so the anti-poaching, you know, the Rambo-like kind of picture and narrative that we often see associated with anti-poaching or rangers and, you know, with guns and things like that, has become really glorified. And that's something to examine when we're telling these types of stories, right? And how can we round out the picture and really like showcase all of the other angles that come with that? And the beautiful part about this story, I highly recommend everybody go watch the full documentary. It's available for free on our website. But it shows you, you know, that even the founder and the leader of one of the major anti-poaching units feels like that he's done it wrong and that they have to correct the mistakes of what they've created. And so it's a beautiful story, and I think that the documentary does it more justice than I can right now.
All right, we'll make sure we put a link to that in the chat. But we do have enough time. You mentioned it earlier on. We talked about being stewards for the land, but let's talk about the oceans as well. And so we're going to show you guys one more video. And so this one is the trailer for Love the Oceans.
For the community here to appreciate the asset that they have under the water, they have to get to know it.
Whether you live inland in an urban area or by the coast, the ocean is integral to you functioning as a human being.
So in order for a community to be able to fall in love and want to protect this amazing asset that it has, they have to be able to experience it. They have to be able to see it.
Eu vim do nada, tem que ser alguém até que isto tudo termine. Eu tenho que contribuir, ser exemplo da minha comunidade.
So if you like breathing, if you like eating, and if you like having fun, you should love the oceans.
Okay, thank you. So same question. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've been involved in this project and how your team has seen impact from it?
So, being of Portuguese ancestry and knowing that my grandfather was involved in a lot of the wars in Angola and different Portuguese-speaking parts of Africa, I feel a deep responsibility to right some of the wrongs of my ancestors. And so this was a project that called to me. I also speak the language, so it was just a natural inclination. I'm a diver. Like, I love the ocean already. You wouldn't have to convince me to love the ocean. But I also just really want to support the work of the people running the organization as well. They're two incredible women. And I love that they've really taken a lot of effort to work with the community, make sure all of the elders, everyone's aligned, that there's transparency, that there's, just all of this effort being put into the way that this project is happening. And so even though it is it's started by foreigners, it's led by the community, and they're employing members of the community and things like that, which I think is really important. And so like I mentioned earlier, one of the first steps of creating this ecotourism, destination is for them to create an actual marine protected area. So this is an area. Here we go. This is an area known for its humpback whales, whale sharks, like extremely gorgeous flora and fauna experiences to be had. It's a great place to dive and do all kinds of things. You can even just sit in your hut and look out at the ocean and see whales jumping in the distance. And we had one experience where we went out there, and you'll see it if you watch the full documentary, where we had this magical sunset experience, and there were so many whales, humpback whales, just jumping and spinning and splashing all around us. And the person who took us out, who's been there for 30 years, told us he'd never seen anything like it in all of those years. Wow. So it was just really magical. And so to create that marine protected area, we need scientific studies to be done and to show that, this is indeed a space that's worth protecting, as if everything shouldn't just be protected. But so that's the work that they're doing. And so it's great to see when we can join forces in a good way. They're a good example of how that can be done.
Excellent. Okay, well, I want to get into a few questions that we have. I have some that were emailed to me, and of course, just a reminder to everyone that you can also put them in the chat on YouTube if you have anything, and we'll try to get to a few here. The first one is from Emily, and she wants to know if you can talk about an experience that you had where when you did the project, you tried to be as ethical as possible, but in the end, you had regrets because something came up afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, what would life be if we didn't learn through mistakes, right? So yeah, there's definitely been times where maybe everything wasn't well communicated. I think a lot of things come down to communication. And so it's really made me a lot more mindful about, making sure that I clarify, I take make the effort to put things in writing and make sure that everyone's in agreement. Things like that really go a long way. And it speaks to what I was sharing earlier about the before aspect, the preparation leading up to something. And honestly, sometimes experience is the best teacher. So just don't be hard on yourself and know that, you know who you are. You're a good person and that you're going to keep trying. And that's all that matters.
Now, when it comes to resources to help photographers if they're interested in, say, getting into documentary photography, what are some of the ways that they can ensure that, the trips that they're going on, the people that they're affiliating with are going to be ethical?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question as well. Again, I think ask a lot of questions. I think if you can, you'll solve a lot of these problems by going with an Indigenous run or community led initiative. Also, I think it's good to just ask questions of community members before going, ask other people that have worked with this organization. Reference checks also go a long way. When we're working with different organizations, we look for different criteria. Like I said, one is, if it's community led. If it's not community led, then we look at other factors like, do they employ majority locals? What is the makeup of the organization? What is the history of the organization? There's going to be a lot of questions that you're going to want to look at, but starting there would be good.
All right, and what about Photographers Without Borders? Are there opportunities, or is there any reason why people should consider joining or educating themselves about Photographers Without Borders?
Yeah, I would say if any of this resonates with anyone, then you have found your people. And so I think the biggest reason to be part of our community, and you can talk to Barry as well, but the biggest part to join is just to join like-minded people who are on this journey together, who are learning together. There's at every one of our events, all of our resources, these type of topics are touched upon. We go into these, questions, looking for answers and just looking to learn and educate ourselves as well. And then we also offer courses on ethical literacy and certifications. So if anyone wants to take a deep dive into that and learn how to do these things through practice, that's what those courses are there for. And we have stellar feedback and reviews and results from those who've taken our courses. So highly recommend that as well.
Fantastic. And if people want to hear more about your work, where are some other places that they can reach out, or any other places that you can suggest for inspiration?
Yeah, well, please consider joining our community. Talk to me. You can email me at danielle@danielledasilva.com. You can see my work on my website or, read more about me at danielledasilva.com. My Instagram is at Danielle Khan Da Silva, DANIKHANDASILVA. And Photographers Without Borders would be Photographers Without Borders. You will have no trouble finding.
Yes, and we've put some of the links in the comments there or in the chat, so you can find those very easily. Well, thank you so much, Danny. I'm so glad we had a chance to finally chat and talk about some of these important topics. Yeah, it was great chatting with you.
This has been really great, and I just want to thank everyone who's here, who's taken the time to be here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I wish you all well on your photography and storytelling journeys.
Wonderful. A reminder for all of our guests, if you registered tonight, we are going to send out a feedback survey. We'd love to hear what you thought about this, if you have any ideas of other topics that we can go through on TCSTV. And if you didn't register and you still want to get in on that, or you want to send me some of your feedback, my email address is evelyn@thecameraster.com. I always love to hear what your thoughts are. And of course, we have more TCSTV live content coming up very soon. And so you can head over to thecameraster.com TCSTV.com and find out more about that. Or if you like what you saw, you can also subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button as well as the notification bell so that you can be notified the next time that we go live here on TCSTV. Until next time, we hope to catch you again very soon.